In this video, we will examine the incident where Jesus heals the blind man. This incident is quoted in John chapter 9 verses 1 to 12 as you can read on the screen. Jesus sees a man who was born blind from birth. His disciples ask Jesus whose sin caused the man to be born blind, his own sin or that of his parents. Jesus answers them saying that neither sinned but that the works of God should be revealed through him. Jesus then heals him. There is one important statement to note here, but that the works of God should be revealed. That we can read in verse 3. We will examine this closer in this video. When we read John chapter 9 verse 3, we understand that the reason for that man to be born blind was so that God's work will be glorified in him. Or in other words, it was God's will that this person was born blind. In all common editions like the KJV, ESV and the NIV, we can read the same message of cause and effect. It's like God intended this man to be born blind so that Jesus can come and heal him later on. Being born blind is terrible, and I am sure that this person suffered throughout his life begging on the streets. We also read that this person did not do a sin or his parents. So the question I have is, did God's will make this person to be born blind? You will agree with me that this is an important question now in the minds of many Christians, some of whom are righteous people. So why should this question arise? All the religious faiths in the world believe that some supernatural power that they call God or gods is responsible for the good and evil in this universe. The ancient Romans and Egyptians, for example, believed that their gods use humans as chess game pieces and control them. So according to the Romans and Egyptians, they as humans need to please both the good and the bad gods. So they built hundreds of temples to the good and the bad gods and sacrificed to both so that they can play it safe. But true Christian faith stands apart from such beliefs and makes a unique claim that God is always good and evil is not in God's nature. So if evil is not in God's nature, then what does it mean when we read that the person was born blind so that God's work be revealed in him? Let's try to solve this question. In Exodus chapter 34, God introduces himself and briefly describes his nature to Moses as you can read. We can see that God describes himself as merciful, abounding in goodness and so on. We all know that God cannot lie. The next few lines where it reads as visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon children confused many, including the disciples, to mean a generational curse. But the line visiting the iniquity does not talk about generational curse in any sense. It just means that the family of a person also suffer due to the nature of human relationships and dependencies. If a person falls sick, then his children also suffer, right? That is what God meant in those lines that he spoke to Moses. If we read Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 16 and Ezekiel chapter 18 verse 20, we will see that God does not do generational curses, but rather each person is accountable for their own sin. We read that Jesus is actually confirming Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 16 when he says that it is not due to a generational sin. In order to find out the true meaning of the verse that implies that blindness was caused due to God's will, let's put on our Heaven's Gate investigation cap and dig further. We may need to take some grammar classes first for a few minutes. Ancient Greek grammar to be precise, as it's what the Gospel of John was written in. So bear with me for a few slides. A subjunctive mood in grammar is used for a verb to express multiple forms of request, wishes, order, etc. The subjunctive mood is a common form of expressing moods in many languages ranging from ancient Greek to English. There are two common forms of subjunctive moods. First is the command subjunctive, also called imperative subjunctive. This is a command given and requires action to be taken. For example, if you take the sentence, "We will obey God's commandments," that shows our love for Him. You will notice that it has a command or an action mood expressed in these words. We will obey. The second common form is called as purpose subjunctive, also called potential subjunctive. This mood shows or explains a purpose behind an action. For example, consider this statement. For the love of God, we will obey His commandments. You will notice that here the purpose is mentioned using the word for that conveys a purpose. So the purpose of obeying God's commandments is that we love Him. Do you notice the difference between these two forms of expressions? I am not making this up. You can look up the dictionary for subjunctive moods and many other examples of that. I have given few links in the description below for further reading in case if you want to see how subjunctives are used in multiple languages like ancient Greek. In John chapter 9 verse 3, we see the word of interest to us. This is the Greek word hina that is highlighted in the screen. This word hina was translated as a purpose subjunctive and written down in English as so that. As we have seen earlier, this brings a purpose or a cause and effect meaning to the sentence. But the word hina in Greek is a subjunctive verb and can be used to express many moods like a purpose or a command, as we have seen in the previous slide. So let's try to put this in the other form of the subjunctive verb and see what it means. We can translate the Greek word hina in English in two ways, as you can see on the screen. Hina can be either translated as so that, which is a purpose subjunctive, or it can be translated as let, which is a command subjunctive. Let's try to put this in the verse and see what meaning we get. The first one is using hina as a purpose subjunctive that you are familiar with from the common Bible translations. This means that the man was born blind because God wanted to reveal His works in him. Or in other words, the man was born blind due to God's will and had to suffer for a long time till Jesus came and healed him. Here, it appears that Jesus is being mysterious in His answer. He was born blind because God's work should be glorified. The second one is using hina as a command subjunctive. This means that Jesus is taking action or giving command like, "Let this be done for God's glory." Jesus is replying to the disciples, "It was not due to sin, but let him be healed for God's glory." This shows Jesus as a man of compassion and action oriented. When He saw the blind man, He understood the pain and suffering that this person was undergoing and immediately swung into action and then healed him. Just like the Jesus we know, right? This change in the word also has theological significance in trying to understand the cause of pain and suffering as given in the scriptures. Now, I think that the usage of the command subjunctive or let the works of God be revealed in him may be more accurate. But let's add the context to this. If we read the next verse, we understand that Jesus is in some urgency. He says, "I must finish the work before night comes." So the context is that Jesus wants to get things done quickly as he does not have much time left on earth as a human. So I think that a command verb of "let it be done" is more appropriate to denote the urgency that Jesus felt in this incident and towards his mission. Of course, As we all know, Jesus, the Word of God, is quite used to saying the word let, right? Let there be light. This type of subjunctive verb translations exist in other chapters also. For example, if we read Titus chapter 3 and verse 13, we can find that different translators use different subjunctive clauses. Here, Paul is asking Titus to provide the needs of Zenas and Apollos. There are two forms of writing this, as we can read in the following translations. The KJV and ASV Bibles use the purpose subjunctive verb and gives a purpose. Here, the reason for Titus to give to Zenas and Apollos is because they should not lack anything. The NIV and ESV Bibles use a command subjunctive verb and gives a command or an order that should be fulfilled. In this translation, Titus is giving a command to give to Zenas and Apollos. The meaning is derived from the mood of the speaker. In the first translation, Paul is expressing a wish, and in the second translation, Paul is giving a command. So, does this really matter? In the example of Paul talking to Titus, there is really no theological impact as it is a historical statement and either of the words do not change the outcome. But in the case of Jesus' statement on the blind man, it actually deals with the nature of sin and suffering because Jesus is the Word of God. Based on our learning today, we see that in this incident, Jesus only answered the question that was asked to him. He did not really say that it was due to God's will. This understanding helps us to clearly establish that God's will is not the cause for a man to be born blind. There are a few righteous people who are suffering today and they may have similar questions like, did I sin, or did my parents sin, or did God's will cause this? This understanding would prove to them that it was neither their sin or God's will that they suffer. Now that we have seen about the more appropriate meaning for the verse, let's summarize what we know. The man was not born blind due to sin or God's will. God's good nature is consistent with what we read in the Old Testament also, thereby proving for the 1000th time that Jesus is the Son of God and the God of the Old Testament also. Teachings that say that it was God's will that caused blindness to that man is not scripturally accurate. So, why do the righteous suffer? Jesus did not give an explanation of the reason for the blindness because it's already given in the Old Testament scriptures. For now, we have discovered a new nature of God as revealed through His Son, Jesus Christ, that God is action oriented and He will come to the rescue of the righteous people who call out to Him. Hope this video was useful to you and not all Latin and Greek.
I hope you enjoy watching this video. Please send us your comments. If you have not subscribed to us, please click on the subscribe button below to be notified of new videos. Thank you for watching.